I remember exactly the moment those words came out of my son's mouth. It wasn't just a sentence. It was as if he had ripped a piece of me and thrown it to the ground. I had spent years making sure I was never a burden. I chose my words carefully before speaking, avoided showing up unannounced, and even timed my visits so I wouldn't bother anyone. But that day I realized that, to him and to Lucia, I was nothing more than a problem. It's strange how you can dedicate your entire life to someone and suddenly realize that the place you occupy in their heart is much smaller than you ever imagined. I always believed that the greatest inheritance I could leave my son was the certainty that he had a mother who was present, yet free without demands. I didn't want him to see me as a burden, so I kept my struggles silent. I managed my own bills, attended my medical appointments, and fixed what broke at home. I even bought gifts for him and Lucia just to show that I still had something to offer. But deep down, I began to sense that maybe this attitude of mine had created a distance, like my life wasn't truly part of theirs. What hurt me the most in that instant wasn't just what he said, but what was implied. It didn't come out of nowhere. These were feelings he had kept buried, only waiting for an opportunity to surface. And when such truths emerge, you realize nothing goes back to the way it was. I felt a void so deep it seemed my story with him had ended right there. It was as if a door had closed and all I could see through the crack was a reflection of everything that once was. And, ironically, it was that moment that made me start seeing something I had never had the courage to admit. Before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel Vengeance Vintage Stories. We are building a community of incredible women who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the story. I was in the kitchen, stirring pots and setting the table with that meticulous care I always showed when preparing for family. The sound of their conversation drifted down the hallway, muffled at first, until a phrase cut through the air. "She won't agree at first, but we need to insist to convince her to go to the residence." My entire body froze. I stood there, gripping the tray as if it were the only anchor keeping me upright. Time seemed to stop, and suddenly I was hearing the verdict of a lifetime of dedication. In that moment, I realized it wasn't about their concern for my well-being as it might seem to anyone else. The tone of their voices, the urgency in coordinating arguments, it all revealed that it wasn't about caring for me but about removing me from the scene. It was as if my presence were an obstacle to their comfort, a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. And I stayed there silent because I knew that if I entered that room with my heart exposed, I might say things I would later regret. As the pot boiled on the stove, a mixture of memories bubbled inside me as well. I thought of the times I had welcomed them into my home, the meals I had cooked with love, the bedtime stories I told my son as a child. And now hearing that they planned to send me away was like watching a movie where, at the end, the main character is discarded. Deep down, I knew that from that moment on there would be no turning back. Something was changing, and it wasn't just my routine. It was my entire life being pushed onto a path I had never imagined taking. After those heavy days, I realized I needed concrete answers. I went to the office of the lawyer who had handled all the family's legal matters for years, especially after my husband passed away. I sat in that leather chair that creaked with every movement and, looking him in the eyes, asked to review all the documents still under my name. I wasn't seeking revenge at that moment, but clarity. And as I flipped through each folder, I began to realize there was far more in my hands than I had ever imagined. The biggest surprise was discovering that the house Carlos lived in, the same one where I had prepared countless dinners and decorated for Christmas, was registered under my name. Not only that, but the investment fund set up for my grandchildren, the result of years of discipline and savings from my husband and me, was also under my control. It was as if I had suddenly found the keys to a safe I didn't even know I owned. I felt a mix of relief and indignation. Relief in knowing I wasn't entirely unprotected, and indignation in realizing that perhaps they counted on my ignorance to manipulate me. At that moment, my inner stance shifted. I no longer saw myself as a helpless victim before the decisions of Carlos and Lucia. I realized that with the right pen and the right words, I could redraw the entire board. And it wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming the respect and space that had always been mine by right. This discovery sparked a flame inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet but steady energy that would make me act differently from that point forward. He arrived with that rehearsed tone, as if ready to present a carefully thought-out plan for my well-being. He sat on the couch, crossed his legs, and began talking about comfort, security, and the so-called peace of mind I would have in a senior residence. I listened in silence, observing every word and every pause, like someone reading the fine print no one dared to write. When he finished, I took a deep breath and calmly but firmly said, "Carlos, before you talk about where I should go, I think you should remember where you're living." The silence that followed was almost tangible. His face slowly changed color as if he had been struck by an unexpected blow. First came shock, that lost look of someone searching for a quick escape from what they had just heard. Then indignation, eyebrows raised, breath quickened. I, on the other hand, remained composed as if each word I spoke were a carefully placed stone in his path. I told him I had gone to the lawyer, reviewed all the documents, and that the house he lived in, with all its comfort, was mine by right. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I let the force of truth do the work. I added, without hurry, that I would not accept being treated as a nuisance, and that any decision about my future would come from me and no one else. He tried to argue, but his sentences came broken, as if every syllable stumbled against the certainty that he had underestimated the mother in front of him. That day something shifted in the air between us, and I knew that from that moment on, the game was about to take a turn he hadn't foreseen. He tried to smile as if stepping around a stone on the path, pretending nothing had happened. He denied saying what I had heard, tried that old tactic of twisting the story as if I had misunderstood. But I was no longer the mother who lowered her head to avoid conflict. I looked him in the eyes and said clearly and unmistakably that I had heard every word, and that there was no room for flimsy excuses. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the sentences he had uttered that afternoon. With a firm voice, but without raising my tone, I made it clear that a real family does not discard its members when they become more fragile or less useful. Family is about care, respect, and presence, not convenience. I spoke of a neighbor who, despite financial difficulties, adapted her home to welcome her elderly mother, because she understood that love is not measured by the space a person occupies, but by the importance they hold. It was as if I was holding a mirror up to him, and the reflection was far from pleasant. It was in that moment I noticed something new in Carlos's eyes. He no longer saw me as that predictable figure who would accept any condition to keep the peace. He realized that I was willing to change the rules of the game, that I had more cards in my hand than he imagined. And perhaps for the first time he understood that my decisions would not be guided by the fear of loneliness, but by self-respect. I could feel that the conversation was not over. But now I would be the one setting the pace. When he realized that his previous arguments no longer held any weight, Carlos changed tactics. He started talking about my grandchildren, trying to touch the part of my heart he knew was most vulnerable. "And what will you tell them if they have to leave the house?" he asked, as if putting the burden of childhood trauma in my hands. It was a clear attempt at manipulation, using my love for those children as a shield for his own interests. But this time I didn't fall for it. I looked at him with the same serenity that only comes after enduring far greater pains. I told him I would tell the truth exactly as it happened. I would tell them that their grandmother only defended herself from those who wanted to get rid of her. Because in the end, hiding the truth is also a form of betrayal, and I was not willing to teach my grandchildren to live under lies disguised as protection. I wanted them to grow understanding that love and respect go hand in hand, and that when one is missing you have to stand your ground. As I spoke, I realized that my words hit him harder than any legal threat ever could. He knew that if the boys heard my side of the story, his image wouldn't come out unscathed. It was as if, for the first time, he understood that control of the narrative was no longer in his hands. I could see in his eyes the frustration of someone realizing that their weapons no longer intimidated, and that the battlefield was shifting sides. The next morning, I was tidying the kitchen when I heard hurried knocks at the door. When I opened it, I found Sophia, my granddaughter, her cheeks flushed, her eyes watery. She said she had left home on her own, that she couldn't bear to hear the arguments and lies they told about me any longer. Her chest heaved between her words, and I realized this wasn't just an impromptu visit. It was a silent plea for refuge. I sat with her in the living room, holding her small hands and feeling the strength of her grip, as if she wanted to anchor me there forever. Sophia looked at me like someone seeking an anchor in the middle of a storm. She said that even after hearing what they said, she couldn't believe it. She knew me, she knew who I truly was. Her words pierced my defenses and reminded me that, no matter how much they tried to erase my image, some bonds resist any poison. I looked deeply into her eyes and promised, with all the sincerity I could summon, that I would never do anything to hurt her or push her away. I told her she would always have a safe space by my side, no matter the circumstances. In that moment, I realized that this unexpected embrace wasn't just a granddaughter reaching out to her grandmother. It was also a silent pact of loyalty, something neither Carlos nor Lucia could ever break. And inside me, I felt that this innocent gesture could change more than we imagined. Carlos appeared at my door with a stern face and a look that mixed anger and nervousness. He came to get Sofia, but even before greeting her, he attacked, accusing me of putting ideas in her head, interfering in the upbringing of my grandchildren. I took a deep breath, knowing that any impulsive response could be used against me. And with the same calm precision one uses to move a key chess piece, I said that, unlike him, I do not use children as pawns. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether to respond or simply turn away. I took advantage of that pause to make it very clear that my patience had limits. I stated unequivocally that, from that day forward, I would remove myself completely from their lives. It wasn't punishment, it was a conscious choice to no longer allow myself to be disrespected. I told him that if maintaining contact meant erasing myself, I preferred to pay the price with my absence. As he tried to process my words, I saw in his expression a mixture of surprise and discomfort. Carlos didn't expect me to have the strength to sever the bond, at least not in this way. Sofia, silent, looked at me with a mix of sadness and understanding, as if she knew that this decision wasn't against her, but for me. And somehow I knew that this distancing wasn't a definitive end, but the beginning of something yet to unfold. I told Carlos that I would have my decision about the house in a week. It wasn't just about taking time to think. It was about showing that the choice was mine, not his. I took the opportunity to say something he might never have stopped to consider. That the value of a mother cannot be measured by convenience. That my role in his life was not to be an accessory to store away when no longer useful. I wanted him to understand once and for all that respect and love are not favors, they are rights. As I stepped away, I felt the need to preserve the bond with those who truly mattered to me, my grandchildren. So I began writing letters to each of them. Long letters filled with stories, memories, and small life lessons. In every word, I embedded the certainty that, even from a distance, I loved them deeply. I didn't want physical separation to become an emotional wall. These letters were my way of saying, I am here, I will always be here, even if you cannot see me every day. For the first time in many years, I began thinking about my own needs before the expectations of others. It was as if a door that had always been locked inside me finally opened, revealing a space where I could breathe freely. I found myself planning small things for myself. From reading a book I had long postponed to thinking about short trips to places I had always wanted to visit. It was a timid beginning, but filled with a new feeling. The realization that I could live for myself without needing anyone's permission to exist. When I realized I needed immediate support, I didn't hesitate to call Martina, my longtime friend. I called straight away, explained the situation, and asked for temporary refuge. She answered with the kind of warmth only true friends have. No judgment, just acceptance. Arriving at her home, I felt a mix of relief and gratitude. Every corner seemed to breathe peace, as if every object and detail reminded me that here I could simply exist without masks. As I unpacked and organized my small space, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. Not an abstract freedom, but the tangible freedom of making my own decisions, of moving without the obligation to please or justify myself to anyone. Even small gestures like choosing where to place my books or preparing my favorite tea carried a sense of autonomy I had almost forgotten. I sat in the living room looking out the window and realized that this refuge was not just physical but emotional. It was the beginning of a change, a new cycle in which my choices would take precedence. For the first time in years, I felt I could breathe deeply and plan my life without fear, without rush, without the shadow of judgment that had followed me. At that moment, I realized that the first step in rebuilding my story was being taken, and that everything that followed would simply be a consequence of that decision. After reflecting on everything that had happened, I decided to act strategically, yet fairly. I called my lawyer and asked him to prepare a lease agreement for Carlos, with one important detail. The amount would be symbolic, far below market value. It wasn't for personal gain. It was entirely for the future of my grandchildren, ensuring that the next generation would have security and stability. As I explained this, I felt the quiet satisfaction of turning a difficult situation into something positive. Carlos, as expected, was surprised. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and indignation, as if he didn't understand my intentions. He asked directly, "Why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath and answered calmly, making sure each word conveyed clarity and firmness. I explained that it was not punishment nor revenge. It was an opportunity for him to understand the value of things, the importance of respecting property, and, above all, family. As I spoke, I realized that the lesson went far beyond the contract itself. It was about showing that love and care are not just about physical presence, but about actions that reflect commitment and responsibility. Every clause, every condition I imposed carried a silent message. Value what you have, cherish those you love, and learn that power is not just control. It's about how you turn situations into opportunities for growth and learning. In the following days, I realized that Martina's house was not just a physical shelter but a space that allowed me to rediscover who I truly was. I began reclaiming hobbies I had set aside, reconnecting with old friendships and allowing myself activities that brought genuine joy. Every small gesture, from opening a book to preparing a cup of tea, seemed to reignite parts of myself I had forgotten. It was as if, for the first time in years, I could breathe without a weight on my chest. I decided I needed to invest in myself. I started practicing yoga, feeling my breath and body in harmony, something I had never truly experienced before. Painting returned to occupy my afternoons, each brushstroke connecting me with emotions I hadn't realized were trapped. I also joined a book club, where every meeting was a window to new ideas, debates, and laughter. Gradually, my world, once limited to family routines and others' problems, began expanding to include my own happiness and fulfillment. As I dedicated myself to these activities, I realized there was an Elena beyond the mother and grandmother everyone knew. A woman capable of deciding, creating, challenging herself, and reinventing herself. Each step in this process reminded me that it's never too late to rediscover yourself, and that true happiness does not depend on anyone's approval, but on the respect and care you have for yourself. It was a quiet yet powerful awakening, showing me that I could finally live for myself, and that this was only the first stage of a larger transformation yet to come. 2 months passed since I began rebuilding my life, and I realized I was ready to reconnect with my grandchildren. I arranged a quiet meeting without fanfare, just to be with them and feel the connection that time could not erase. From the moment I saw them, I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. We played, talked, and laughed, and each gesture reminded me of the importance of nurturing these bonds with care and genuine presence. As the afternoon went on, I noticed Carlos and Lucia keeping their distance, watching from afar, perhaps waiting for an opportunity to intervene. But this time I decided I would not be manipulated by their fear or pressure. My priority was the children's emotional safety and well-being, and to ensure that I had to set clear boundaries. The time spent together would be solely with them, without allowing Carlos's presence to interfere with the peace I had finally achieved. It was an exercise in patience and strategy, but also in conscious love, teaching my grandchildren that healthy relationships, clear boundaries, and mutual respect are just as important as affection and shared time became a priority. I realized that even while keeping a certain distance from Carlos, I could still build meaningful memories, protect my peace, and show the children that love doesn't mean giving up on yourself. And in this process, every encounter became more powerful and transformative, reinforcing my decision to continue this way. I arranged a coffee with Carlos, determined to have an honest conversation. No detours, no hiding feelings. When he arrived, I immediately noticed the weight in his gaze, that mix of guilt and embarrassment only seen in someone who has finally recognized their mistake. He started hesitantly but soon apologized, acknowledging that for years he had taken me for granted and underestimated my worth. Hearing that didn't erase the past, but it opened a door to something new, and I knew I had to approach this moment wisely. I took a deep breath and responded with calm and firmness. I forgave him because holding a grudge would only imprison my heart, but I made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean returning to the same old dynamics. I explained that moving forward, our relationship would need to be rebuilt on solid pillars: mutual respect, sincere communication, and clearly defined boundaries. It wasn't about imposing rules. It was about creating a safe space where neither of us could hurt or disrespect the other again. As we spoke, I realized that this conversation was more than a partial reconciliation. It was a test for both of us, an opportunity to show that we can learn from mistakes and that relationships can evolve when approached with awareness, patience, and empathy. And in that instant, I felt we were beginning to write a new chapter, where every future action would depend on intention and the willingness to honor what had long been ignored. After much reflection, I maintained my decision. The house would remain in my name, but the rental income would go entirely to my grandchildren's educational fund. It wasn't just a financial matter. It was a way to show that important decisions should carry meaning, that every action has consequences and lessons. I felt that by setting this condition, I was sending a silent message about responsibility, care, and boundaries. As I signed the documents with my lawyer, I realized that this contract represented much more than a real estate transaction. It symbolized the new family dynamic I had created, a relationship where love and boundaries coexist, where presence is not automatic but earned through respect and conscious actions. It was a practical lesson, teaching that care does not equal submission and that true affection does not need to be confused with permissiveness. Every detail of that contract carried purpose, ensuring security for the grandchildren, maintaining my autonomy, and simultaneously showing Carlos that change is inevitable when one fails to respect others. More than property or numbers, this decision declared that I would now set the rules of my own space, establishing a solid foundation for future interactions where love and responsibility go hand in hand. Over time, I noticed small changes in Carlos's behavior. He began showing genuine consideration, gestures that once seemed unthinkable. I remember one occasion when he organized a simple yet thoughtful gift for Martina and me. It showed me that when clear boundaries are set and one stands firm in their decisions, people around you begin to respond differently, with more respect and awareness. Lucia too went through a quiet transformation. At first, she remained cold and distant, as if any demonstration of respect was impossible. But gradually, even discreetly, she began acknowledging my independence and respecting my choices. I realized that it wasn't necessary to impose my presence or fight for recognition. It was enough to exist with integrity and consistency. Her change in behavior was silent proof that clear boundaries foster respect. This transformation was not limited to isolated gestures or words. It reflected in the entire family dynamic. The firmness and clarity with which I set my rules created a new balance, showing that love is not the absence of boundaries but respect combined with closeness. Every act, every acknowledgement, no matter how small, proved that my stance bore fruit, not only for me but for everyone around, reinforcing that relationships can be rebuilt with wisdom, patience, and integrity. 2 years have passed since I began taking control of my own life, and I can honestly say that today I feel more complete and balanced. Mornings no longer start with anxiety or excessive worry. Instead, there is space for conscious choices, genuine joy, and cultivating relationships that truly matter. One day, my curious grandson Emilio came up to me and asked, with that innocent honesty only children have, "Grandma, are you happy?" It was a simple question, yet loaded with meaning, making me reflect on the journey I had traveled. I smiled and replied that yes, I am happy, explaining how every decision made, every boundary set, and every moment of self-care contributed to that. Emilio, with eyes shining with admiration, said that his father always tells him that I am stronger than a superhero, because I teach and influence without needing magical powers. Those words touched me deeply because I realized that my choices and the firmness I demonstrated not only transformed my life but also inspired those who observe and learn from me. That was when I understood that the true lesson that spans generations is not in titles or wealth, but in the way we respect and value the people we love. By acting with integrity, conscious love, and clear boundaries, I show my grandchildren that healthy relationships are built through action, not imposition. And so I realized that without even noticing, I had been planting seeds of respect, care, and wisdom that would bloom far beyond my own story. Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if this story made you reflect, like the video and subscribe to the channel to follow more real, intense stories like this one. Because in the end, each story is an opportunity to see life with new eyes.